Cowboy found a mail-order bride with bruises and a hidden letter no one expected. Before we begin, take a moment to share your city. Where are you listening from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to leave a rating from 0 to 10. Now find yourself a quiet place, breathe deep, and let the whispers of the Wild West carry you into tonight's tale. In 1883, beneath the blazing Montana sun, a stagecoach came to a halt before a small, dust-covered depot. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped down. Her faded blue dress brushed the dirt, a bonnet shielding her face. The wind kicked hard, tugging away her scarf, and there it was, the shadow of a bruise, purple and heavy along her cheek. In her trembling hands lay an old letter. Its edges frayed the words, tilted as if written in confession. In the West, every face holds a story, but who had left that mark upon such fragile skin? And what secret did that shaking letter try to hide? Far off in a lonely log cabin, Nathaniel Reed sat before the fire. By his side lay a letter, its corners water-stained, yet still carrying the faintest trace of lavender. Night after night, he had read those words until even his calloused hands quivered, as though afraid to tear the last thread of hope. He was 32, a man who had weathered 8 long years alone in Montana. Winters so harsh, the snow sealed his door shut, leaving only the howl of wind and the crackle of flames for company. On one such night, desperate for more than silence, he had written a letter eastward to a mail-order bride service. Nathaniel never expected a reply. He had written only to ease his heart, to let sorrow drift away with the fire. But then, against all reason, a response came. A name, Zoe Caldwell from Boston. A stranger, yet perhaps the first comfort he had known in years. In just 3 days, she would arrive in Silverdale. 3 days, and his cabin would no longer echo with only one breath. 3 days, and his heart trembled with both fear and longing. He scrubbed the floor until his hands bled, bought a new mattress for the empty room, and stood before a cracked mirror. The face that looked back seemed older than his years, sun-browned, carved with hardship. She'll take one look. "And leave, won't she?" he whispered. Even his own voice sounded like confession. Outside Montana stretched golden in the late spring sun, the endless prairie unconcerned with a cowboy's quiet fears. But inside that small cabin, one heart beat faster than the wind itself. A heart caught between dread and the fragile hope carried by a single letter from the east. And in just a few days, fate would step off the train at Silverdale Station. For Nathaniel Reed, nothing would ever be the same again. Part 1. The Mark of Violence. Silverdale was a small town tucked deep in the red dust valleys of Montana. Just one main street stretched through it, lined with a weathered wooden church, a faded saloon, and the quiet stagecoach office. That day, the sun poured down in a harsh glare as though the whole air were simmering. Folks gathered in the dusty square, whispering about the coach that was about to arrive. Those coaches were the only heartbeat tying this frontier outpost to the distant east. Nathaniel Reed had come early. He tied his horse to the hitching post outside the office and walked slow, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low to hide the tension in his eyes. In all his years of solitude in the valley cabin, nothing had set his heart pounding like this moment. And now, just 3 days after a letter from Boston had found him, he stood here, this big weather-worn man, suddenly fragile as a boy. waiting for his first love. He remembered every word of that letter. Zoe Caldwell, 24, Boston. A woman with a little learning, able to cook and sew, willing to share a life on the frontier. The small, neat script had carried with it the faintest scent of lavender, something he had not known in more than a decade alone. Each line had opened a new vision. A meal shared with someone across the table, laughter slipping through cabin windows, kind eyes instead of four lonely walls. The sound of wheels rolled in from a distance. Red dust rose like a curtain across the sky. The townsfolk turned quickly, children shouting as they ran to the roadside. Nathaniel drew a deep breath, his rough hands clenched tight together. His heart thudded so hard it seemed to rattle his chest. In that moment, all his preparations, the clean-swept cabin, the new mattress, the imagined simple supper, shrank before one haunting question. Would she look at me and feel only disappointment? The stagecoach swayed to a stop in front of the office. The driver jumped down, tossed a small wooden trunk to the ground, and a cloud of red dust swallowed it whole. Then from inside the coach, a figure stepped down. A woman in a worn blue dress, its folds creased with road dust bonnet, drawn low, a veil falling to hide her face. She paused, eyes searching the crowd of strangers. Her thin hands trembled as they gripped the strap of a small leather bag. Nathaniel swallowed hard and stepped forward, his voice rough and strange in his own ears. "Miss Caldwell." The woman flinched softly, then raised a hand to lift the veil. As the fabric fell, Nathaniel felt the whole world tilt. Her eyes were green, bright as April fields, yet shadowed by sorrow. But it was not their color that held him still. It was the bruise, deep and spreading across her left cheek, trailing to the cut at her lip. The crowd murmured. Women whispered behind gloved hands. A man squinted in surprise. Nathaniel stood frozen, his gaze locked on that mark. A slow anger rose in his chest, as if someone had carved a claim of cruelty into her very skin. Seeing his eyes, she turned quickly aside. From her bag, her slender fingers drew out a folded note. She handed it to him, her voice a breath against the hot wind. I can explain. If you wish to break the agreement, I will understand." Nathaniel unfolded the paper. The neat lines told the truth. Her eyes already carried abuse from kin, a forced marriage, a life treated as less than human. At the bottom, the note added, "If you choose to refuse, all expenses will be reimbursed. Please do not feel burdened." He read it again and again, each word like a cold blade sliding across his heart. Pity welled up, tangled with a deep fury at those who had dared turn a woman into this. When he lifted his eyes, hers met his wide green, but wary as a sparrow, long chased and beaten. Nathaniel drew in a breath. In the glare of dust and sun, he folded the letter and pressed it back into her hand. His voice dropped steady sure. "You're not alone anymore." The words were not just to calm her. They etched themselves into his own heart like a vow. Zoe blinked her lips, trembling as if to speak thanks, but faltering. For a moment, her fragility showed like a candle flickering in the wind. Then she whispered, hope and doubt woven together. You still wish for me to be your wife?" Nathaniel looked deep into her eyes. He would not promise what he was not ready for. But one truth was clear: she needed safety, and that he could give. "I want you safe first. The rest can wait." And in that pause, the town fell quiet. Even the sun seemed to soften. Something unseen bound him fast, pulling him free from the loneliness of so many years. Zoe nodded faintly, lips parted as if to thank him, but only silence came. She lowered her gaze to the dust, her shoulders trembling. Nathaniel stepped forward, lifting the small trunk from the dirt. He swung it gently onto his shoulder, then offered her a hand. Her back stiffened as she climbed onto the saddle, but Nathaniel mounted behind steady hands holding the reins. The townsfolk watched, some shaking their heads, some whistling low. Zoe bowed her head against their stares, brown hair trembling beneath her bonnet. Nathaniel tightened the reins, the horse stepping forward, red dust rising to cover the whispers. He turned his eyes toward the horizon, where the valley stretched wide in the late golden light. There stood a cabin, waiting for a new breath of life. And in the quiet, Nathaniel felt his heart slow steady as the horse beneath him. He whispered again, just loud enough for the wind to carry, "You're not alone anymore." A simple vow born of that moment would become the red thread binding their lives. For from the instant Zoe Caldwell stepped down at Silverdale Station, her face bruised her hand, clutching a trembling letter their fates had already joined as one. Part 2. A promise of safety. Nathaniel's horse carried a steady rhythm along the dirt road leading out of Silverdale. Red dust rose behind them, drifting away with the whispers of the townsfolk they had left behind. Nathaniel sat tall in the saddle, strong hands steady on the reins, feeling the fragile weight of Zoe pressed lightly against him. That nearness made him realize just how much she trembled. She clutched her small bag tight against her chest, eyes fixed on the horizon, never daring to look back. The sound of hooves echoed through the barren valley, mingling with the sharp wind as it swept over gray sagebrush and silent cottonwoods. Nathaniel's gaze lingered on her worn dress threads, frayed stitches clumsy and tired. Not the clothing of someone well cared for, but of a woman who had endured far too much. His jaw tightened. Since the moment he had seen the bruise on her cheek, the image had burned into him. Anger and sorrow pressed heavy in his chest. Yet above them all rose one simple vow: never again would cruel hands touch her. The road climbed a gentle rise. As the horse pushed upward, Nathaniel spoke at last, his voice low and rough. "Zoe." She flinched, turning her head, partway eyes avoiding his as if afraid of judgment. He drew in a slow breath and let the words fall soft, carried by the wind. "You're not alone now." The simple promise drifted out across the wide prairie. Zoe froze her fingers, gripping the bag until her knuckles whitened. Then she closed her eyes, lashes trembling, moisture gathering at the corners like dew. You won't cast me aside?" Her voice was thin, breaking under the weight of fragile hope. Nathaniel answered, without a pause, "I told you you're safe now. Whatever fear they gave you, it ends here." A breeze swept down from the mountains, carrying with it the dry scent of grass and dust. She turned her face away, hiding the bruise in the shade of her bonnet. Yet Nathaniel saw her shoulders ease, if only a little, as though a burden had begun to slip free. The road stretched on, pulling them away from the noise of town into endless fields. The late sun cast molten gold across the swaying grass waves, of fire rippling in the breeze. Above, a hawk circled wide its shadow, sweeping the earth before vanishing into distant peaks. Nathaniel stayed quiet, letting the hoofbeats speak what his words could not. Zoe sat small and still in her faded blue dress, a few strands of hair falling loose beneath her bonnet. Now and then, the wind lifted a faint trace of lavender from her bundle, the same scent that had clung to the letter which had changed his life. At last, she spoke hesitantly. "Your name. It is Nathaniel, isn't it?" "It is. You needn't pity me." "I know. Coming here like this, I must be a disappointment." Nathaniel tilted his head, voice steady and strong. "Disappointment? No. What I see is someone who suffered greatly, yet still found the courage to travel this far. Not everyone could." She fell silent. Only the sound of hooves and their mingled breaths remained. Then, barely audible, she whispered, I had nowhere else to go." The words pierced Nathaniel's heart. He looked out across the open prairie, and in his mind, his lonely cabin rose before him, the one that had held nothing but firelight and silence for so many years. Suddenly, it no longer seemed a prison. It could be a refuge. He tightened the reins, lightly, voice dropping low. "Then from today on, that place will be yours. A place where you won't have to be afraid." By the time evening shadows stretched across the land, they crested the final ridge. Before them opened the Montana Valley, awash in honey-colored light. A silver creek wound its way through the fields, shining like liquid glass. And there, nestled among the grasslands, stood a simple log cabin. Smoke curled gently from its chimney, a fence framed the cattle pen, and rows of young vegetables lined a small garden. Nathaniel pointed, his voice softer now, yet filled with pride. "There. That's home." Zoe turned her head, eyes lingering on the sight. Her lips moved faint but certain. "It's beautiful, so quiet, so free." Nathaniel looked away, but a small smile touched his lips. It had been so long since anyone had spoken kindly of the place he had carved with his sweat and blood. In her words lay a gentleness he had never expected to hear. The horse slowed near the gate. Nathaniel dismounted first, then offered his hand to her. She hesitated, then let him help her down. His touch was brief, respectful, carrying reassurance rather than claim. Inside the cabin was simple but warm hand-built table, a shelf of worn bookstools on the wall, the hearth glowing with fire. At the far corner, a door opened to the room he had scrubbed clean and set with a new mattress. He carried her small trunk inside, setting it down gently. "This room is yours. Not much, but I hope it brings you comfort." Zoe's hand brushed the fresh quilt. Her eyes shone with quiet wonder. Turning toward him, her voice came soft yet firm. "It's perfect." Nathaniel bowed his head, his heart stirring. No golden promises, no wealth, no grand gestures were needed. Only a roof, a safe place, and the truth of his vow. That night, as the wind rattled the cabin walls and fire popped in the hearth, Nathaniel sat at the table listening to the faint stirrings from her room. Another breath, another presence, the soft rustle of cloth, all proof that he was no longer alone. In the Montana silence, he leaned back and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the quiet did not weigh heavy, but soothed. At her window, Zoe sat watching the mountains in the moonlight. She thought of the road she had left behind, the wounds she still carried. Yet in her mind, his words returned again and again, a gentle refrain. "You're not alone now." Tears slipped down her cheek, but they were not bitter as before. They were the tears of someone who had glimpsed light after a long, dark night. And that evening, for the first time in many months, Zoe Caldwell slept in peace. Part 3. A Cabin of Warmth. The The little log cabin sat cradled in the valley, glowing like a lantern against the Montana night. Outside, the wind whistled through the pines, rattling the old shingles. Inside, the fire burned bright in the hearth, painting the wooden walls with a rosy glow, pushing back the chill that still lingered from long months of snow. Nathaniel pushed the door open, his boots leaving dusty prints on the floor. He set a bundle of dry wood in the corner, then turned to steady Zoe as she stepped inside. She moved slowly, almost uncertain if this humble home was truly meant for her. The air carried the resinous scent of burning pine mingled with the faint aroma of coarse bread he had baked earlier that day. Zoe paused in the main room, her eyes traveling across the space. It wasn't large, nor was it fine, but it was neat, cared for. A plain wooden table with 2 chairs, a shelf of books, their spines faded, a pair of worn boots placed neatly by the hearth. The firelight cast their shadows high across the walls, flickering like silent companions. Nathaniel cleared his throat, voice deep but hesitant. The small room to the right. I cleaned it out for you. The window looks over the garden. I hope you'll find it to your liking. Zoe turned toward the half-closed door. Soft golden light spilled through the crack. She stepped inside. There stood a narrow bed with a fresh quilt, a mattress that still held the faint scent of straw. At the window, pale curtains swayed gently in the draft. And on a small wooden table, a white vase held a few sprigs of wild purple flowers Nathaniel had gathered that afternoon. She stood still, her hand resting on the quilt, feeling its simple warmth. What rose inside her was not fear, not unease, but something unfamiliar relief, a place set aside just for her. Turning back, her eyes shone in the firelight, her voice quiet yet certain. It's perfect. Thank you. Nathaniel nodded, his gaze sliding away, as though afraid to look too deep. He gestured toward the hearth. Tonight, just bread and bean soup. Nothing fine, but it'll be warm enough. They sat across from each other at the table. Zoe removed her bonnet, and her brown hair tumbled free, catching the fire's glow like threads of copper. Nathaniel broke a piece of hard bread, dipped it into the soup, and ate in silence. Zoe spooned her meal in small bites, her eyes lifting now and then to watch him. There were no grand words exchanged, only the scrape of spoons, the crackle of the fire, and the occasional whisper of wind through the shutters. Yet the silence was not heavy. It lay over them like a quilt, comforting rather than empty. After a time, Zoe's eyes lifted. The bruise still marked her cheek, but her gaze had softened. How long have you lived alone? Nathaniel thought a moment before answering. 8 years. She exhaled softly, almost to herself. I, too, have felt alone for 8 years. Her words stopped him cold. He asked no more, only nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them without need of questions. When the meal ended, Nathaniel gathered the bowls. Zoe rose to help, but he lifted a hand firm yet gentle. Leave it. Tomorrow will be soon enough. Tonight, you should rest. She hesitated, then nodded. Slipping back into the small room, she closed the door softly. Nathaniel sat by the fire staring into the flames. For the first time in years, he heard new sounds in his cabin, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of cloth. Proof that he was no longer alone. He leaned back a long breath, leaving his chest. Even the sound of her breathing, faint beyond the wall, was enough to change the air of the place. In her room, Zoe sat by the window, moonlight pouring silver across the fields. A coyote's cry echoed in the distance. She hugged her old shawl tight, her mind wandering back to Boston's dark days. But then Nathaniel's face rose before her, the steady eyes, the rough voice, the vow spoken at the roadside. You're not alone now. Tears welled and fell, but they were different now. No longer bitter soft like morning dew. She laid down the quilt, fresh and warm against her skin. For the first time in many months, her body eased, her eyelids heavy. In her drifting sleep, the wind outside seemed to sing a lullaby. You are safe now. And in the main room, Nathaniel still did not sleep. He sat by the fire as it burned low, his thoughts circling. Had he done right? Could he keep such a promise? He remembered the bruise on her cheek, the wary pride in her eyes, and the vow that had risen from his lips. Now, his whole life was bound to it. He placed more wood on the fire, then at last lay down. In the dark, he listened to Zoe's even breathing through the wall. It was the most beautiful sound he had heard in years. So their first night beneath one roof came to a close, not with promises of love, not with lingering touch, but with a simple meal a room offered, and two hearts cautiously discovering a warmth long thought lost on the harsh frontier. Part 4. The Past Revealed. That Montana sunset burned red, a great fire stretched across the sky. Its glow spilled down the valley, bathing the cabin, the fields, and the wooden fences in copper light. The evening wind carried the scent of damp earth and dry grass, a whisper of nightfall. Nathaniel sat on the porch steps back against a post, a wooden cup of weak coffee in his hand. Beside him, Zoe sat quietly, her fingers, laced eyes, fixed on the distant purple mountains. They had worked side by side all day. Zoe had spread grain to dry picked vegetables from the garden and tidied the shelves in the kitchen. Nathaniel had cut wood, repaired the broken cattle pen. They had not spoken much yet. Her presence filled the silence that once pressed on him like a weight. And when the sun began to sink, she stepped onto the porch, and he followed without a thought. The breeze lifted a few strands of her brown hair. She pulled her thin shawl tighter, though one cheek still faintly bruised showed in the light. In the sunset glow, the fading mark seemed like an old scar of memory etched across her gentle face. For a long while, only the song of crickets filled the air. Then Zoe sighed softly. "Nathaniel?" He turned his head. Her voice was low, carried away on the wind. "Perhaps you should know why I had to come here." Nathaniel said nothing, only nodded, waiting. Her gaze dropped to her hands, slender fingers trembling. After a silence, her words came halting, scraping her throat raw. "My parents died when I was 14. They left a small farm in Vermont, a garden of apple trees, fields of barley. I thought I would grow up there safe. But then my uncle in Boston claimed guardianship. He took me away, said it was his duty." Her eyes drifted far, wrapped in sorrow. "In Boston, I lived in a large house, but it was cold. He controlled everything. What clothes I wore, what food I ate, even who I could speak to. In time, I understood I was not a niece to be raised, but a possession to be bargained." Nathaniel's hand tightened around the wooden cup until it creaked. Her voice caught breaking. "When I turned 23, he began bringing men, older, wealthy men. They sat at his table discussing me like land, like stock. One of them, near 50, widowed but rich, was chosen in the end. She lifted her face, the sunset shimmering in her green eyes, heavy with tears. I begged. I pleaded. But my uncle would not hear me. He struck me. And it was not the first time. The bruise you saw at the station was the last I could endure. That night I fled. A kind friend at the post office helped me send a letter to the mail order service. They hid my name, gave me this one chance. Her voice broke into sobs. I climbed into a coach in the dark, carrying only one small trunk. I had no idea where I was going. Only that if I stayed, I would wither away piece by piece. Nathaniel was silent. Pain twisted in his chest, as if he too felt that cruel hand strike his cheek. The sight of her now slender shoulders trembling, yet with eyes that still burned with defiance, made his heart ache. He set his cup down and turned to face her fully. His voice came rough deep. No one deserves that. No one. A tear slid down her cheek, but in her eyes, for the first time, there was more than fear. There was relief that she was not being judged. I'm afraid, Nathaniel. I fear he'll find me still. But here, at least I can breathe. He nodded slowly, gaze steady. Here you are free, and I'll do everything in my power to keep it so. The valley wind stirred, making the fire inside flicker. Zoe drew her shawl close, then leaned back lightly against the porch post. Together, they watched the sun slip behind the mountains, leaving a last trail of embers on the horizon. After a pause, she spoke again, her voice even softer. I am not used to men speaking with kindness. For years, no one has told me I deserve to be safe. Nathaniel lowered his eyes to his rough hands. When he finally spoke, his words were slow, certain. Then you'll need to grow used to it, because here, it will be the truth. Zoe stayed silent, but the faintest smile touched her lips, a fragile curve like the first mist of autumn dawn. And so, as the last light faded, that small cabin became a refuge, a place where two wounded souls could breathe in the same rhythm. On that porch, as night descended, Zoe's painful past was spoken not to bind her, but to be shared. And Nathaniel, in his quiet way, gave her the most precious gift, understanding. Part 5. Days of Quiet Peace. Summer in Montana never arrived with a shout. The snow slipped quietly from the far peaks, feeding silver streams that ran through the valleys. Fresh grass spread green along the slopes, while birch trees trembled their tiny leaves in the wind. Sunlight poured golden across the meadows, over the wooden fences, and down the dirt road that led toward the cabin. Nathaniel had long grown used to summers spent alone caring for cattle, tending fields, and working endless days. But this year was different. Each morning, he woke to new sounds. The soft clink of dishes in the kitchen, the light tread of Zoe's steps in the garden, even the quiet hum of her voice as she bent over the rows of vegetables. The cabin, that once smelled only of smoke and straw, now carried new scents, warm bread from the oven herbs drying by the window, and at times the faintest trace of lavender from the scarf Zoe had brought with her from Boston. These little things changed the place from a shelter into a home. Zoe soon proved she was not only someone to be protected, she worked with steady hands and quiet patience. In the garden, where Nathaniel had once scattered seeds carelessly, Zoe knelt to weed, to water, to shape the soil. Soon beans climbed in neat rows. Tomatoes hung, green squash spread its vines across the earth. When she caught Nathaniel staring at the transformation, she smiled gently. Any land will answer to a patient hand. At the table, meals changed as well. No longer just dried meat and hard bread, but fresh vegetable soup, sweetened milk, even simple cakes. Nathaniel realized almost with a start how carelessly he had been living. He ate quietly, glancing at Zoe as she cleared the table, his heart caught between gratitude and a strange shyness. Even the cattle felt her presence. Nathaniel had always fed them well enough, but without much notice. Zoe, however, lingered. She stroked their hides, whispered softly, as though they could understand. Soon, the herd grew calmer, giving more milk. Once Nathaniel paused to watch her at the milk stool, brown hair falling loose as she smiled over the pail of frothing white. He stood still, a pride swelling in him that he could hardly name something like hope. By the stream, on hot afternoons, Zoe carried her basket to wash clothes. The water ran icy, but she worked steadily, scrubbing fabric with quiet focus. When the breeze lifted her hair and droplets scattered like little gems, Nathaniel, mending a fence nearby, would look up, then quickly lower his head, afraid of being caught too long in such gentle beauty. One evening, she brought back wildflowers, arranging them in a porcelain vase for the table. The cabin, once plain, seemed to brighten with their pale purple. Nathaniel returned from the fields and stopped short at the sight, his chest tightening. He had never thought such a small thing could change the air of a house. Zoe noticed his gaze and only said with a smile, "A little color," to remind us this place is more than dust and wind. He gave no reply, but in his heart, for the first time, the word home took root. At night, when the work was done, they sat by the hearth. Nathaniel told of winters, past snow, piled high against the doors, wind howling like monsters in the pines. Zoe listened, green eyes shining in the firelight. Then she spoke of her childhood in Vermont, her father's apple orchard, autumn festivals, the smell of hot pies her mother once baked. Her voice was low and wistful, like water flowing through the dark. Sometimes, Nathaniel risked a dry jest. Zoe would laugh softly, then cover her mouth as though laughter were a thing she wasn't used to. But for Nathaniel, that sound was more precious than gold. He saw the bruise on her cheek fade day by day, replaced with the glow of gentleness. One morning, he stepped outside and found a new curtain hung in the window, stitched from rough beige cloth. Zoe stood nearby, needle still in hand. She met his eyes, her voice soft. "I thought a bit of covering might make the room feel more welcoming." He touched the fabric, feeling warmth in each stitch. Everything she did was not only for herself, but to make the cabin a haven for them both. And so time passed. Nathaniel realized something he had not believed: possible solitude was not his fate. With small, steady acts, Zoe had brought life back to the land and to him. That evening, as they stood together on the porch, watching the sun spread honey gold across the meadows, Nathaniel found himself whispering, "Once I thought this place had only silence, but now I hear something else." Zoe turned curious. "What do you hear?" His eyes lingered on her, and he smiled faintly. "The sound of a home." She froze, then bowed her head, letting her hair hide the tear glistening in her eye. That summer drifted by in quiet rhythms. Mornings, full of work afternoons, by the stream, evenings by the fire. The old log cabin ceased to be a shelter for a lonely man and became instead the rebirth of two souls. Zoe, the woman who had once stepped off the train, bruised and trembling, left her mark in warm suppers and curtains at the windows, in rare but precious laughter. Nathaniel the cowboy, who had lived long with silence, now found his heart keeping pace with the sound of her footsteps. Hope once thought lost had returned. Gentle, steady, enduring, like the Montana summer itself, healing the land after a long winter's hold. Part 6. When Darkness Drew. Near Silverdale, on an early autumn morning, lay under a veil of pale mist stretched across the rooftops. The cottonwoods along the road had begun to shed their golden leaves, crunching softly beneath hooves and boots. Nathaniel and Zoe rode into town for supplies, salt sugar, a few rolls of cloth. All summer, they had rarely left the cabin. But today, Nathaniel thought it time for Zoe to be seen in public, to walk with her head high as a free woman. They entered a small eatery on the main street and chose a table by the window. Outside, the sun was still gentle, pouring a soft golden light across the wooden boards. Zoe wore a simple but clean dress, her hair tied neatly back, her face no longer shadowed by bruises. Nathaniel looked at her pride, filling him quietly. She seemed like a flower reborn, fragile yet brave, seeking its place in this hard land. The server brought 2 plates of stew and bread. The aroma spread through the air, softening the din of the little cafe. Nathaniel was about to speak of planting corn for the next season when the door swung open. Voices hushed for a moment as Sheriff Blackwood Reed stepped inside. He was a broad man with gray beard and eyes narrowed by years of dust and sun. The sheriff glanced around, then found Nathaniel. He gave a small nod and strode to their table. Nathaniel inclined his head in greeting, but Zoe stiffened, hands clutched tight in her lap. Instinct told her that any talk of law could bring danger. Blackwood didn't sit at once. He stood there, his shadow stretching over half the table. His voice was gravelly but measured. "Reed, we need to talk." Nathaniel gestured for him to sit. The sheriff dropped his hat on the table, cast a brief look at Zoe, then leaned close, his tone lowered so others could not hear. "News from Helena. A man's been asking around for a young woman. Matches her description." Zoe paled instantly. Her green eyes widened, her breath cut short. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table until they whitened. Nathaniel set his broad hand close to hers, a silent anchor. The sheriff went on grave. "He calls himself her legal guardian. Family. He's offering a reward to anyone who'll bring word." The air grew heavy. The clatter of forks and voices of the other diners seemed to fade. Nathaniel's eyes locked on the sheriff's. His name Caldwell. Harrison Caldwell. At the name, Zoe shivered as though struck by a cold wind. She turned her face away, but tears shimmered at the edges of her eyes. Her body curled in on itself as though the memory of blows and commands returned in that moment, right there at the table. Nathaniel's fists clenched tight. Rage burned in his chest, but he steadied his voice. "Sheriff, she is here by her own choice. No one will drag her away." Blackwood gave a slow nod, his sharp eyes softening with sympathy. "If that's true, then to me, she's just another homesteader. But be cautious, Reed. A bounty draws eyes, and a man like Harrison won't quit easy." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. Before leaving, He looked at Zoe, his tone gentler. You owe no one here. Just remember, he won't let go. Be ready. The door closed behind him, leaving a silence heavy as stone. The cafe's noise returned, but for Nathaniel and Zoe, it felt far away. Zoe's head bowed her voice, trembling like a thread. He's found me. Nathaniel. If he comes here. Nathaniel leaned closer, his warm hand covering hers. His voice was rough but firm. No, he hasn't found you, and he won't not while I live. Zoe lifted her gaze, fear shining there, but also the faintest flicker of trust. The sunset light spilled through the window, bathing her face in crimson. Nathaniel saw not only trembling in her eyes, but quiet strength too. The strength of a woman who had endured hell, yet still reached for hope. His voice dropped just for her. You chose this place. Believe it, this is where you belong. No one has the right to steal that from you. They left the cafe as evening shadows stretched long. On the ride home, Zoe sat silent before him on the horse hands, gripping her bag straps. Nathaniel held the reins, feeling each tremor run through her frame. He longed to draw her into his arms, but he held back. True protection was not possession, and he knew she needed freedom more than anything. The trail led them homeward. The mountains cast their dark shadows, the air heavy with unease. Nathaniel's eyes found the cabin in the distance, and resolve tightened in his chest. From now on, the rifle would stay close, the door locked each night. That supper passed in silence. Zoe barely ate, her gaze far away. Nathaniel did not press her. He let the firelight glow, hoping warmth would ease her chill. When she rose to retreat to her room, he spoke softly. Zoe. She turned. He met her eyes, his voice slow and steady. A man like him may buy many things, but not this truth. You deserve freedom. Here you are, no one's property. Her eyes brimmed with tears. She gave a small nod and slipped into her room. The door closed, but Nathaniel knew a seed of trust had been planted, fragile but real. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the cabin walls like a warning of storm. Nathaniel sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. He hated the weight of a gun in his hand. Yet now, her safety and the peace of this home rested on his resolve. In her small room, Zoe lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling. Harrison Caldwell's shadow haunted her, but so did Nathaniel's voice. Not while I live. She clutched the quilt, letting those words shield her heart. For the first time, even within her fear, she felt not powerless. There was a man standing not for gain or for gold, but for something simple, her safety. That night, Montana's sky glittered with stars, but within the cabin, darkness pressed heavy. Neither Nathaniel nor Zoe found deep rest. One lay awake with the burden of duty, the other with the weight of fear. Yet between them stretched an unseen thread, woven of resolve, of fragile hope, that even as darkness gathered, light might still endure. Part 7. A new light. Autumn in Montana painted the valley in gold. Dry grasses swayed like waves in the wind, and the sky stretched wide and blue, clear as glass. Out in the fields, Nathaniel bent to his work, repairing a stretch of fence before the snow's return. The old rails had grown weak, needing new posts to stand firm. Sweat darkened his shirt, but he kept steady, hammering nail by nail, his broad figure rising tall against the golden backdrop. From the cabin, Zoe stepped out, her hand resting lightly on her belly, almost without thought. She paused, breathing in the autumn air, rich with dry grass and earth. Her heart pounded, for the words she carried would change everything. Yet her eyes lifted toward Nathaniel, the quiet, steadfast man whose very shoulders spoke of strength. That silent strength gave her courage to walk on. Her shoes brushed soft over the earth as she crossed the field. Nathaniel looked up, laying his hammer aside, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. His eyes warmed with curiosity, touched with concern. "Something the matter, Zoe?" he asked, voice low and rough. She stopped before him, her hand still upon her belly, her cheeks flushed in the cool breeze. She lowered her gaze, then lifted it again, her green eyes trembling, yet glowing with a strange new light. I think I might be with child." The world stilled. Nathaniel froze, his hand gripping the rail, his heart skipping before thundering like a drum through the valley. Are you certain?" His voice cracked, shaking more than it ever had before danger. Zoe nodded faintly, lips quivering. "Not certain yet, but I've missed 2 months. Each morning brings weariness, and I feel something different within me." Nathaniel breathed hard, his eyes shining with sudden tears. He stepped forward, clasping her hands. His were rough, hers soft and cold. He held them firm, not too tight, but strong enough to steady her. "Zoe, this is a blessing. Do you understand? A blessing I never dared hope for." She bit her lip, tears trembling. "I am happy, Nathaniel, but afraid too. Afraid that with my past, this child could be stolen from me. Afraid he might still find us." Nathaniel shook his head, eyes burning like fire. "No one will touch you or our child. Do you hear me, Zoe? Whatever it takes, I will keep you safe." Her tears finally fell, but they were sweet, not bitter. She leaned into his chest, letting the sound of his heartbeat calm her fears. In the days that followed, life in the cabin changed. Every task held the promise of new life. Zoe gathered scraps of cloth, sewing them into tiny swaddles. She paused, often resting her hand on her belly, smiling softly to herself. Nathaniel, too, thought of the child in every chore. Splitting wood, he thought, "This fire must keep 3 warm." Drawing water, "These buckets will bathe our child." Mending the roof beams, "The house must hold firm so our little one never knows fear." Evenings found them by the hearth whispering names. If it is a girl, Zoe said I would call her Amelia, my mother's name. Nathaniel's eyes softened. If a boy, Joseph, after my father. The firelight danced between them as though Amelia and Joseph already lingered there waiting. One morning, Nathaniel caught Zoe stumbling with a heavy pail from the stream. He rushed forward, taking it from her hands. No more heavy work for you." She tried to smile, but fatigue shadowed her face. Nathaniel set the bucket down and took her hand, voice firm. "From now on, I'll shoulder the weight. You need only care for yourself and for our child." Zoe's eyes glistened. "Nathaniel, you don't need to carry it all. I want to build this home with you." He lowered his brow to hers, his voice tender. "You already have, Zoe. From the moment you stepped off that train, you made this place a home. Now just keep us safe inside it." Autumn deepened, leaves carpeting the paths in gold. Each evening, the cabin glowed like a small lighthouse across the valley. The townsfolk spoke less and less slowly, accepting Zoe as part of Silverdale. But in Nathaniel's heart, a watchful caution remained. Harrison Caldwell might not yet be done. And yet above the worry, the truth of new life outshone all else. Fear no longer ruled. Joy did. Hope did. One windy evening as the fire crackled, Nathaniel drew Zoe close. His hand rested gently on her belly, where a fragile life was taking root. His voice was husky, but tender, a vow whispered against the storm outside. All my life, nothing has ever been so precious. You and this child are my light. Zoe nestled her head against his shoulder, smiling through tears. And you are our shelter. That night, beneath a sky alive with stars, the cabin became the cradle of hope. A love, once broken, had taken root again, stronger than before. And in Nathaniel's heart, the words he once spoke at the station echoed again, not only as comfort, but as a sacred vow. You're not alone now. Part 8. The Storm and the Prayer. That night, black clouds rolled down from the distant mountains, clawing across the sky. The wind tore through the valley like talons. Montana was always harsh, but this first storm of the season raged fiercer than any Nathaniel had ever seen. The log cabin shook under the force of it. Shutters banged against the walls. Thunder roared like cannon fire. Lightning split the heavens, lighting the flooded fields in harsh flashes. Inside, the fire blazed, but its warmth struggled against the chill seeping through the cracks. On the bed, Zoe writhed in pain. Sweat drenched her brow, her hair plastered to her skin. Her hand clutched the quilt, eyes shut tight, her body seized by wave after wave of agony. The time had come. Her labor had begun. Nathaniel sat at her side, his rough hand wrapped around hers. He had faced blizzards, wild beasts, and death itself in the saddle, yet never had he felt so powerless. Each cry from her lips pierced his chest like a blade. Nathaniel! Her voice trembled, broken. I'm here, Zoe. I'm right here. He wiped the sweat from her forehead, forcing calm into his voice, though his hands shook. Outside, hooves pounded against the storm. It was Mrs. Thornton, the older woman from a ranch miles away, who had helped deliver countless babies in the valley. Nathaniel had ridden through the downpour to fetch her when the pains began rain whipping his face like lashes. Now she swept inside with her satchel of clean cloths and sharp instruments. All right, Reed, she barked briskly. Stand strong. This is women's work, but you can pray out on the porch. Nathaniel nodded hard, though his chest twisted. He pressed a kiss to Zoe's brow, whispering, You're stronger than anyone I know. I believe in you. Then he forced himself outside. The storm struck him full rain, soaking his cloak until it clung heavy as stone. The wind cut to the bone, lightning blazing across the drowned fields. Nathaniel dropped to his knees in the porch, his calloused hands clasped tight. For the first time in years, he prayed. His voice was raw, carried off by the storm. Lord, I don't know how to ask. I've spent my life working, not speaking. But tonight, please keep Zoe safe. Please let me see her smile again. And please guard the child who has not yet seen this world. He bowed his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. From inside, Zoe's cries tore through the cabin, driving his heart into the depths of fear. He closed his eyes, picturing her face, those proud green eyes, that shy smile by the hearth. She had turned his cabin into a home, and now her very life was its cornerstone. He could not, dared not imagine losing her. Another scream split the night. Nathaniel nearly leapt to his feet, but forced himself still. He knew he would only hinder Mrs. Thornton. He pressed his back against the wind, whispering again and again, Let her live. Please let me keep them both. Time crawled like eternity, each minute cut deep. Inside, he heard Zoe's ragged breaths, Mrs. Thornton's steady encouragement. Outside, the heavens crashed. Then suddenly, between thunderclaps, another sound broke through. Small, sharp, and piercing, the cry of a newborn child. Nathaniel froze. His heart stopped, then surged in his chest. He rushed inside. The door flew open, firelight spilling across Mrs. Thornton's weary but smiling face. "Congratulations, Reed. A girl, mother and child are well." Nathaniel fell to his knees beside the bed. Zoe lay pale and exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, but her lips curved in the faintest smile. In her arms, a tiny bundle stirred soft cries rising from rosy lips. Tears blurred Nathaniel's eyes. His hands trembled as he reached out, touching the baby's cheek. Warm, delicate, alive. A miracle he had never dared believe could be his. "Zoe, you are wondrous." Zoe lifted her gaze, voice ragged but shining. "Nathaniel, this is our daughter." He gathered them both into his arms. Through the roar of rain, he heard the fragile heartbeat, her soft breath, and his own whisper breaking with gratitude. "Thank God. I swear, neither of you will ever be alone again." The storm raged on, but within the cabin, the fire burned brighter than ever. A man who had once believed his life destined for solitude, a woman who had once carried only bruises and fear, now sat together, cradling new life in their arms. And Nathaniel Reed knew the truth. This stormy night would remain etched in his soul forever, the night he prayed with all he had and received the sweetest miracle of his life. Part 9. The Little Angel. Dawn broke over Montana, its first light spilling through the cabin window, carrying with it the scent of smoke, fresh earth, and dry grass. After the furious storm, the air was startlingly pure. The fragrance of damp soil mingled with pine, the murmur of a creek drifting from afar, and the soft chatter of sparrows greeting the day. Everything seemed to rise in chorus, welcoming a new beginning. In the small room, Zoe sat propped against pillows, her face pale from the long night, but her eyes shining bright with joy. In her arms, a baby girl swaddled in white shifted softly, tiny lips pursed as though dreaming. Her breaths came steady, blending with the trembling heartbeat of her mother. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his eyes red from a night without rest. His heart still leapt at each cry of his daughter, then settled into peace as the sound faded. He had never imagined himself here, a man who had spent his life in solitude, now standing in his own home before the fragile miracle of new life. Zoe looked up, smiling faintly when she saw him. "Come here, Nathaniel." He stepped forward, slow and careful, as though afraid to disturb the holiness of the moment. When he reached the bedside, Zoe held out her arms and placed the bundle into his hands. Nathaniel took her, his hands trembling. The child was so light it felt as if he were cradling a drop of morning dew. His eyes widened at the tiny face wrinkled and soft, the delicate nose, the small fists curled tight. Warmth flowed from the child into his chest, awakening a flood of emotion he had never known. Zoe whispered, her voice like the morning breeze. "Nathaniel, this is Amelia." The name rang through the wooden room like a note of music. Nathaniel dropped to his knees, tears streaming. He pressed his lips to his daughter's brow, whispering, "Amelia, my little angel." Tears fell onto her soft skin, mingling with a joy too deep for words. Zoe reached out, touching his arm, her eyes glistening yet steady. And with trembling voice, she repeated the words that had bound them since the first day, were not alone now. Time itself seemed to still. Nathaniel lifted his gaze, eyes wet, and met the woman who had once stepped off a train, bruised and broken, now smiling with her child in her arms. His voice came rough but firm. "No, we'll never be alone again." Morning light poured over all three of them. Nathaniel walked the room, Amelia in his arms, his steps tender, as if each board beneath his feet were sacred. Zoe watched her smile glowing through her tears. At the window, sunlight streamed over them. The baby stirred, a small cry breaking free. Nathaniel laughed through his tears, his voice trembling. "Welcome to this world, my daughter. I promise no matter how harsh it may be out there, you will always be safe in our arms." Zoe's eyes overflowed again, but the tears were no longer bitter. They were tears of healing filled with trust. That morning, they sat at the table together. Nathaniel warmed milk for Zoe, while Amelia slept in a wooden cradle he had built in the night. The soft sound of her breathing joined the crackle of firewood. Nathaniel looked around the cabin, and a strange wonder filled him. The place that had once echoed with silence now overflowed with life. Zoe clasped his hand, her eyes shining. "Nathaniel, do you see this house? It's finally full." He squeezed her hand, his lips trembling, but his gaze alight. "I see Zoe, and I know it all began the moment you stepped off that train." She tilted her head, smiling softly. "The moment you said, 'You're not alone now.'" They fell silent, letting the words linger, turning into an eternal vow. By midday, the skies cleared. Nathaniel brought in sprigs of willow, laying them beside the bed. Zoe looked at him curiously. "What for?" He smiled gently. "Back home, they say willow branches guard a child's sleep. I want Amelia to rest in peace." Her eyes welled, and she nodded, her heart brimming with safety. That evening, Nathaniel sat on the porch with Amelia in his arms, Zoe leaning against his shoulder. They watched the honey-colored sunset pour across the valley. The creek's song drifted like a lullaby. Nathaniel bent to kiss his daughter's hair. Zoe whispered softly, "I never thought I would live to sit here in such peace." He drew them both close, his voice firm with quiet devotion. "All the pain of the past was only to bring us here. And from this day on, we'll never face the world alone again." Night fell, and the cabin glowed with firelight. In the cradle, Amelia slept soundly, her innocent face bathed in the warm glow. Zoe sat, watching her heart overflowing with gentle joy. Nathaniel stood behind his hand, resting on her shoulder. Together, they gazed at their child in silence. In that small room, no darkness could enter. Only the light of love, of healing, of a home that had found its soul. And the words, "We're not alone," now echoed on, becoming the hymn of a family reborn in the Wild West. Part 10. A Lasting Home. Years passed since that stormy night when Amelia first cried beneath the Montana sky. The valley had known winters of white silence and summers of green abundance. The log cabin of Nathaniel Reed was no longer the lonely shelter it once had been, but the heart of a thriving homestead filled with life and laughter through every season. This morning, sunlight poured like honey across the garden in bloom. Golden chrysanthemums lined the fence, and the apple trees Zoe had planted long ago now bowed heavy with fruit. Children's voices rang bright across the yard. Amelia, her hair a crown of gold, now 12, smiling with the warmth of the sun itself. Beside her, Joseph just 10 quick with laughter, and clever eyes chasing her around the bean trellis as their laughter carried through the valley. Zoe stood among the flowers, a basket in her hands, her smile radiant on the face that had once been marred by bruises. Time had left silver in her hair, but her eyes burned bright, steadfast, and kind. Her simple dress stirred in the breeze, and she seemed the very spirit of the home itself. On the porch, Nathaniel sat with an unlit pipe in his hand, watching the scene before him. Peace pressed so deep into his chest that his weathered eyes grew wet. Memories rushed back the dusty depot at Silverdale. The bruise on Zoe's cheek, the trembling letter in her hand, the words he had blurted. "You're not alone now." Who could have guessed that moment would change his life forever? From a man who had once known only solitude, he had been given a home, children, and laughter echoing across the fields. The harsh years had not broken him. They had only deepened the sweetness of now. That afternoon, Nathaniel worked alongside Joseph, mending a fence the cattle had broken. The boy gripped the hammer with eager determination, sweat beading on his young brow. Nathaniel watched him, seeing in the boy's frame a reflection of his own youth, yet freer, brighter, unburdened by loneliness. "Father, am I doing it right?" Joseph asked, voice unsteady but proud. "You're doing just fine, son. Better than fine." The words lit Joseph's face, and Nathaniel felt a pride swell deep inside. This child would never know the isolation his father once endured. From across the yard, Amelia came running with a basket of apples. "Father, Mother says it's time to rest. The pie is ready." Nathaniel laughed, draping an arm over Joseph's shoulder as they walked back together. On the table inside, Zoe had set a golden apple pie, its sweet aroma filling the home. Amelia poured milk, Joseph fetched spoons, and Zoe placed her flowers in a vase before sitting down beside Nathaniel. Their eyes met. No words were needed. In a single glance, they remembered the path they had walked, the girl stepping off the dusty train with a bruise, and a letter the cowboy with weary eyes who had whispered a vow. That night beneath the autumn moon, the family sat on the porch. The children lay on the wooden boards, counting stars, their laughter bright as bells. Zoe leaned against Nathaniel's shoulder, his hand firm over hers. "Do you ever think she whispered it all? Began with just one letter?" Nathaniel nodded eyes, lifted to the glittering sky. "One letter and 7 words." Zoe smiled, her voice as soft as the night breeze. "You're not alone now." The words blended with the children's laughter, with the rustle of grass, with the endless murmur of the stream. No longer a private promise, it had become the very heartbeat of their home. Years later, Silverdale still knew of a prosperous ranch in the valley. A cowboy with silver in his beard, but kindness in his eyes, a woman with gentle smile and hair touched by gray, and 2 children raised not in fear, but in love. They stood as a quiet proof that even in the harsh West, love and goodness could be the only shelter that kept a soul standing. Nathaniel Reed, whenever he watched Zoe laugh with their children, always returned in memory to that fateful day at the dusty station. He knew then that every hardship, every shadow, had led to this, a lasting home, a life fulfilled. Montana, many years on. The Reed homestead still stood, seasons passing one after another, wildflowers in spring, the creek singing in summer golden fields, in autumn snow blanketing the cabin in winter. But through it all, the fire within never went out. Nathaniel, his hair now gray, often sat on the porch in the still evenings. From there, he saw Zoe smile, her eyes as green as the first day he had met her. Children's laughter floated across the yard. The cattle called from the pastures. The wind whistled through the fence rails, all blending into a hymn of peace he had never dreamed possible. At sunset, with honeyed light flooding the valley, Nathaniel sometimes closed his eyes and let memory carry him back. He saw once more the dusty train depot, a frightened young woman stepping down, her face bruised, her hand clutching a worn letter. And he heard again the 7 words he had spoken, not knowing they would bind his life forever. You're not alone now. That day, it had been only comfort. But through the years, it became a vow, a red thread binding 2 souls, the foundation of a home. Opening his eyes, watching the garden bathed in light, Nathaniel felt only gratitude in the harsh West, where storms and hunger and prejudice loomed. It was love and kindness that had proven to be the only shelter. They had turned loneliness into family fear, into hope. He smiled, resting his weathered hand on his knee, whispering softly to himself, to Zoe, to all who might hear. That day I spoke 7 words, and they changed my life forever. You're not alone now. The evening wind carried the words away like a lullaby across the prairie, reaching every heart in need of refuge. For even in the harsh West, love and kindness remain the only shelter. One true word, one steady hand can save an entire life. If this story touched you, leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. And remember to subscribe so you won't miss the next gentle tale of the Wild West.